Hey, I just came back from Trafford Centre. It's the big shopping mall in Manchester, and I've been wearing this today. When it gets cold, this is my fluffy Holden Caulfield hat. I love being out and about wearing this. It keeps my ears warm. And the other day, it was really cold here, and my flat has like shitty electric heating. Let's see, yeah, there's the little electric heater there, and it's like when I use it, it's really expensive, so I just don't have the heating on. And because I live alone, I'm not punishing anyone, and I just wear jumpers and have blankets and stuff and hot water bottles. I'm not going to spend 40 quid extra a month on heating when I could spend 40 quid on books or food. It might get to the point where my flat gets so cold that I do videos with this, but normally in the winter, I can see my breath on a normal day in my flat. And I might have to wear gloves as well, actually, because my hands were cold. So we'll see. But last year, when I was here, it was single glazing, so you can imagine how cold it was then. But now I've got double glazing. But yeah, with this hat, I also love being able to do this, have a little like diva flick. Oh, I also have my tea in my honey Winnie the Pooh mug. I recently saw these Winnie the Pooh mugs. They have an Asda that are really cute, that are Winnie the Pooh mugs, and I really want one of those. But will I get it? Maybe I will, but at this point I've got enough mugs for a whole family, so I could get a mug tree though. Today I went round all the Waterstones in Manchester being like, are you hiring any seasonal booksellers? And they were like, no, not this year, sorry. But I've been going back and forth to them since August, being like, are you hiring seasonal people this year? Are you? And they said no. No, they said come back end of October and ask us. And now I came back and they were like, no. I've been trying to get a job at Waterstone since I was 18, more or less. I've had two interviews with them, and they've always rejected me. I don't know why. I'm like, aren't I bookish enough? Everyone who knows me is like, you'd be perfect there. And I'm like, yes, I would, but they won't hire me. Maybe it's like my attitude. But I'm like, please, I would do anything. Anything. I would get on my knees for a job in Waterstones, and I wouldn't tell us all, honestly. Like, but it's probably reasons like that why they wouldn't hire me. But whenever I go into Waterstones, I'm always so jealous of the people who work there. But actually, it probably isn't that great a job anyway. But I'm just like, it would just be so nice to be around books every day. I wonder if you're a bookseller, if you ever feel like you're part of this elite squad of literary people. Not literary people, because you don't have to be literary to be a bookseller, but it is a kind of literary job, isn't it? You know, working with books every day. If any of you have been booksellers, do you ever feel like you are part of this elite little group, or do you not really feel like that? Or maybe did you feel like that at the start and then you're like, oh, actually, this is boring? Yeah, but I guess I'll never be part of that elite squad. Or if I'm ever a successful writer, I can be like one of those people who tours around the Waterstone stores, and every time I go into Waterstones, they'll have to be like, "Oh my gosh, this is where you're our star writer today," and I'll be like, "Yes, I fucking am." After you wouldn't hire me, and I'll have to be like, "Get me tea now, slave." No, I wouldn't be like that. I'd be very nice, but yeah, just indulging my fantasies. But anyway, moaning aside, I wanted to come in and do my Sunday Reads video because it's Monday today, but yesterday was Sunday, so that's near enough. And I wanted to come in and talk about The Private Joys of Nina Maloney, a novel I finished today, and Margaret Atwood's poetry. So I've been reading these books for about a month, and just the last month I have been in a bit of a slump. I don't know if I should call it a slump, really, because to me, a slump is when you really want to read loads and for whatever reason you just can't get into the books. And for me, I just haven't felt the urge to read that much, which is really weird for me, but just because October has been a pretty shit month for me. So I just didn't feel the urge, and I'm like, this is just poetry, but I'll go into why it took me so long to read this in a bit. This, I actually really, really loved it, even though on the front it says that's the author of Queenie, saying I haven't been able to put it down, and obviously I took like a month to read it, so I could quite easily put it down, even though I really loved it. So I don't know if it was a reading slump. It was more like a reading break. Yeah, a reading break. But then I read that Mariah Carey memoir, so I find that easy to read. It just sometimes I just feel like I just didn't feel the urge to pick them up at all. And I just couldn't like concentrate on them, so I don't know. I think sometimes I'll just be like that, but it's not as if I don't feel like doing anything. I just rather play on my PlayStation or watch movies or sleep or eat or see friends. Yeah, sometimes I'll just be like that. Not very often, maybe like once or twice a year I feel like that. I think that's fine normally. Like sometimes it's a bit healthy to do that if that works for you. But anyway, I've done enough rambling. So I want to talk about this. I mentioned this in my Booker predictions video, where I was predicting what would be on the long list. I hope this one makes the list, and it's meant to be a coming of age novel as well. But it's written by a man, but it's about a woman's search for identity. So yeah, I think that would be interesting if that got on the long list. I adored this book. This definitely should have been on the Booker long list. Like, how can they put Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reid, which I haven't read, but I don't want to read anyway? How could they put How Much of These Hills is Gold and Shuggie Bain over these books? I haven't talked about Shuggie Bain and Hills is Gold yet. I'll probably get reviews on those up in the next few days. But I read those and I wasn't bowled over by either of those. But this, I was really, really bowled over by some of the writing. This is about, it follows a year in 1992 when Nana's mother, Joni, who is white, meets her dad, Morris or Maurice. I never know whether it's Morris or Maurice. I'm just going to call him Morris. Meets her dad, Morris. And her dad, Morris, is black and Nigerian. And they're at Cambridge together. And Nana's dad, Morris, is part of this like Christian group. I think they're evangelists, but the normal like Christian stuff you'd expect. Like they don't like gays, they don't like sin. And oh, hang on, let me take this off. Yeah, I've got hat here, but oh well. Where was I? So it's set in 1992, and then it's set in like 2006 onwards. So you follow Joni and Morris in 1992 as their relationship develops, and then you follow a couple of the other characters off and on. But you mainly follow Jonathan as well, and I loved the character Jonathan. He's probably been my favourite. Yeah, probably my favourite character from a book this year, possibly. Yeah, I would say that. So he's a gay black guy, and I just love the way Okachukwu Zalu, I think that's how you say his name. I love the way he wrote about him. I'm pretty sure Okachukwu, he's gay as well, but he read English at Cambridge. And look at the picture of him. Oh my god, he's lush. Ooh, look at that shoulder muscle. Oh my god. But anyway, this was such a good book. It was so well written. In 2006, you follow Nana Maloney, who's a teenager in school. So you follow her as she's doing her GCSEs in sixth form, I think. So because her dad's black and her mum's white, she's mixed race. So the book is about identity and race, religion. There's always this gaping hole in the novel of when Nana is like, what happened to my dad? And her dad and her mum had a really good relationship. And then it all just went sour one day. And the novel leads up to that. And Nana will ask her mum, being like, Mum, why, where the hell's dad? And then Joni will be like, I can't talk about it. I just can't. So at times I wanted to be like, Joni, like, just tell the girl, for goodness sake. But by the end of it, you're like, oh, that's why you didn't tell her. But yeah, I absolutely adored this book. And I was like, this was so much better than every book I've read on the Booker long list except Mirror and the Light so far this year. But maybe it's because it's dialogue books. Maybe because it's from like a small-ish publishers, I think. You know, if it was by Penguin, it would probably be on the Booker long list because isn't that how Booker prizes work? That they only put on the books from big presses, more or less. So yeah, this definitely should have been on the list. It was so, so good. There were points where the writing was just so strikingly emotional and beautiful. And I think if you like Zadie Smith, If you like D.H. Lawrence, if you like Alan Hollinghurst, you will probably like this book. This book is mainly character focused and relationship focused, so I love that in a book. Also, if you like Mrs. Dalloway, I think you will love this book. And it is also mainly set in Manchester, so I love that. There's one bit towards the end where they go to the gay village. He just managed to capture all the fragile moments between people where people really want to connect to each other, but they're scared to, or they're not sure to, or they're worried about what the consequences will be, so they're like, it's better to do nothing. Or sometimes it's just that instinctively people feel like, no, I'm not ready to do that yet, and then there's these kind of awkward moments, and the way he captured these, it was just so good. Let me read you a little bit. Right, okay, here we go. Most people are not in a position to realise the complexity of human beauty. Maybe it's advertising. Maybe it's because somehow we never quite grow out of our teenage minds. But most people seem to be under a desperate illusion. Most people seem to think that beauty, especially for people who aren't men, is a thing you have, the same way roses have a smell or responsible people have savings accounts. Nena, partly by virtue of not being white, knew better. Perhaps more than most people, she was sometimes beautiful, and sometimes less so, depending on who was observing her at the time. Arguably, and beauty is always arguable, she fell somewhat short of the standards of beauty in the country where she had grown up, and she knew better than to think beauty was something you could ever truly have or hold. No matter how you look, you can be beautiful to one person and utterly invisible to another. Being beautiful, Nena knew, is of little use in the painful moments, in the days, in the long hours when you are ugly. Yeah, the book was about race, and it was also very funny. And what I also liked is that each chapter had a biblical quote at the front. This, I found, was one of the rare books where, when the author uses an epigraph at the start of a chapter or something, normally I read it and I'm like, oh, that's boring, and then read something else. But I actually kept coming back to the quotes at the start because they were biblical quotes, and the characters do talk about religion from time to time. I did find that I kept going back to the quotes to see how they were meant, like whether that was more that's what the characters were thinking or if it was the narrator. So yeah, I really enjoyed this book and I would highly recommend it. And I can't wait to see what he writes next. I think he's a writer of great prowess, and I'm sure he'll have a glittering career as a novelist. So yeah, watch out for him as an author, I think. Okay. Next case. I finished this about an hour ago, Eating Fire. I have dog-eared it quite a bit actually, but I did actually find this book quite boring actually. At the start I was finding it really refreshing. I hadn't really read Atwood's poetry before. I'd read one of her poems, which actually happened to be the first poem in this collection. So I'll read you the first poem, which is called This is a Photograph of Me. It was taken some time ago. At first it seems to be a smeared print, blurred lines and grey flecks blended with the paper. Then, as you scan it, you can see in the left-hand corner a thing that is like a branch, part of a tree, balsam or spruce, emerging, and to the right, halfway up, what ought to be a gentle slope, a small frame house. In the background there is a lake, and beyond that some low hills. The photograph was taken the day after I drowned. I am in the lake, in the centre of the picture, just under the surface. It is difficult to say where precisely, or to say how large or small I am. The effect of water on light is a distortion, but if you look long enough, eventually you will be able to see me. That was my favourite poem, which coincidentally was the first one. That was the one I'd heard about before, which is where like it's this woman standing over a mirror. That's how I pictured it in my mind, but it's not actually that. It's like a mirror. It's a woman under a lake. Yeah, it's like a picture. But I loved that. I thought the eye in the poem was really mysterious. That was really intriguing for me. But most of the poems I actually found like one-trick ponies. Like they were just using metaphor, and it was like, this is a poem. This is a fox poem. And then I'd be reading it going, is it about anything else other than a fox? Not usually. So there is a directness to Atwood's poetry that I kind of admire, because most poetry nowadays is so indirect. It's kind of not meant to be understood as direct, which can be interesting at times, but after a while, it just seems a bit pointless. So Atwood's poetry is always direct, but it felt too direct and too stiff. It felt quite stiff, and not in a good way. Like some of the poems were more prosy, yeah, like this. And I felt more and more as I did it that she's more of a novelist than a poet. She was always trying to rely on a sort of narrative. It was either metaphor or narrative. And I really wanted to be like, Margaret, I wish you'd experimented and that someone had told you, please stop using metaphors in poetry and see what comes out, because I'm sure she could write good poems, but a few of them just seemed very run of the mill poetry. And I was really kind of a bit disappointed how boring they were. It was more that the voice was quite boring in the poetry. Like at first I found the voice intriguing, but all the poems more or less had the same flat tone. And it wasn't a flat tone with rhetorical flair. It was always the same flat tone, which is like the low hills, as if like, yeah, okay, the hills are low, I get that, but you know, where's the fun? There was only like one or two poems that were a little bit fun, and sometimes towards the end of it, particularly, she was using lots of like moon and tides and skulls and mirrors, and it felt too plathy to me. I think if you like Caroline Duffy and you like Sylvia Plath symbolism in Sylvia Plath, maybe you'll like Atwood's poetry. But I think most people who want to read poetry would get on with this because it is so easy to understand. But I think if you're a younger person and you want to get into poetry, I would recommend this because the poetry is so direct that it's easy enough to follow. But it felt like she wasn't really investing that much in the poetry, unfortunately. Some of the poems did feel like reading a Sylvia Plath poem, but if Sylvia Plath wrote boring poetry, which Sylvia Plath never did, God rest her soul, or they kind of felt like Carol Ann Duffy. But then even Carol Ann Duffy in like The World's Wife, she has fun with it, whereas I kind of wanted to shake Margaret Atwood and be like, can't you give me a bit of fun, Margaret? And there were also quite a few poems about old women, and when Margaret Atwood wrote these are from like 1970, some of them, a lot of them. I wonder, because she's coming out with a poetry collection very soon, apparently, I kind of want to, if she was doing like a book tour, I would kind of want to go to the book tour and be like, Margaret, what do you think of this poem you wrote in 1970 about old people? Do you think that was accurate, or do you find it really, really cringy? Because I find it quite cringy and a bit derogatory about old people. But whatever. I guess she was very youngish when she wrote that, so it was fine. Like, where's a poem about old people so that it doesn't sound like I'm just making it up? Oh, here we go. This was part of one called Five Poems for Grandmothers. Benign and wooden, with two mouths to catch your soul, because it is wandering like a lost child. Lift it back safely. But we have nothing, we say. How is she? Not so good. We answer, though some days she's fine. On other days you walk through the door of the room in the house where you've lived for 70 years and find yourself in a hallway you know you have never seen before. Midnight they found her, opening and closing the door of the refrigerator. Vistas of day-old vegetables, the used bone of an animal, and beyond that the white ice road that leads north. They said, Mother, what are you doing here? Nothing is finished or put away, she said. I don't know where I am. Against the disappearance of outlines, against the disappearance of sounds, against the blurring of the ears and the eyes, against the small fears of the very old, the fear of mumbling, the fear of dying, the fear of falling downstairs, I make this charm from nothing but paper, which is good for exactly nothing. It just felt a bit too on the nose and a bit too like cliched old people poetry. So I wonder if she would stand by that poem now, or if she would cringe. And there was also one poem that just annoyed me. It was called Down, and it just used like self-harm as the emotional apex of the poem, and I just felt like it was really slapdash, and I didn't like that. Like, I think that can definitely work in a poem, but it felt like she was just using that, being like, oh, if I write about that, that's really emotional, so that's easy. It just didn't feel genuine. Sorry, Margaret, but that's the truth. Yeah, if you are new to poetry, I would recommend this, or if you're a young person, or if you're the sort of person that finds poetry hard to understand, you'll probably get a lot more out of this than I did. But I wonder what her current poetry collection will be like. If I see that in Waterstones or something, I would look at it to see if it is just the same sort of poetry. And it was also weird a little bit because this collection was selected poetry 1965 to 1995. And all the way through, I kind of felt like she doesn't show any development as a poet. Like all the poems feel very samey. Sometimes the subject matter shifts, but the tone, the form never varies at all. And I was like, oh, God, Margaret. Ugh.
I said what I said.
So it was okay. It was okay. It wasn't awful, but it was just very, very okay. Sorry, Margaret, but stick to prose. That's my Sunday reads for this week, and next I'm going to be reading Burnt Sugar by Avni Doshi. So let's see how I get on with that. All right, bye, and I hope you have a good week.